Today, I thought I'd share some of my very unprofessional opinions on some basic tools that the home mechanic might need or that can be very helpful when you get started working on cars and boats and the like. I also thought I'd talk just a little bit about doing mechanical and maintenance work while living in an apartment.
This is the After Work Garage.
First, let's talk about tools. Starting off with hand tools, I'd say a good pair of channel locks is going to get you far. In a lot of cases, if you don't have the right socket or you can't really get a socket or wrench in there, a pair of channel locks will suffice. It may not be the right tool, but often it gets the job done. When it comes to hand tools that I use the most, it's got to be a 3/8 inch ratchet. I use this all the time. It's a nice medium size for getting off most bolts that you're going to encounter. Pair this with a 3/8 inch socket set. This is nothing fancy, just a basic chrome socket set. This is metric. I do have standards somewhere, but I rarely use them. Most of the bolts you're going to encounter on motors are metric these days. And if you do encounter the odd standard bolt, if it's not on too tight, you can actually use metric sizes, which are going to be just a little bit bigger to get it off. Do be aware, though, that if you're doing that, you run the risk of stripping the bolt out. So if you got it, it's better to find the right standard size. Now, I do also use a 1/2 inch ratchet. And this is for bigger bolts, things that are stuck on a little harder. But basically that's just for convenience in being able to turn things. If you're only going to buy a 1/2 inch driver, I would get a breaker bar. And this is a bar that's meant for a 1/2 inch socket, and you can really crank on it. These things don't have any mechanical teeth in them that are going to fail, so you can put a lot more pressure on that for those really stuck bolts. The ratchet that I use the second most would probably be a little 1/4 inch like this. These are handy for getting into tight spaces as well as getting smaller bolts or a lot of smaller bolts, because when you're ratcheting, you're not moving around all that metal. So you don't have a giant hunk of metal here that you have to turn every single time. Obviously that just pairs with a 1/4 inch socket set. I have it both in metric and in standard here. You can often get kits just sold together where you have a 1/4 inch socket set and a ratchet. Now both of these I got in a similar kit like that. Not very expensive, less than 20 bucks. They're not going to be the best quality. In fact, that's not. And they may break a little sooner, but for less than 20 bucks, I've gotten a lot of use out of those things. Next thing you're going to want is extensions. One of the biggest pains in working on vehicles is bolts that are stuck way down in there. And if you have a lot of extensions, especially with these wobble heads on them that allow the socket to move around a little bit, there's not going to be too much you can't reach. And it's going to make getting those odd angles a lot easier. The next thing that's probably a must is some sort of hammer. They don't have to be little mini sledges like this, but some sort of hammer to pound on things is going to be a must. I like these because they have a lot more weight on them, so when you're pounding, you get a bigger impact and thrust forward. But if you need speed, a little hammer, regular nail hammer will do. You're definitely going to want to have a set of long pliers. I like these bent needle nose style pliers because they're great for getting hose clamps off. They're great for undoing cotter pins and getting little clips out and reaching around to get things that you may have dropped in a pinch. A little magnet tool like this is great. No matter how careful you are, you're going to drop bolts and screws down, and these just extend out into a wand. It has a magnet on the end so you can reach down and grab that screw that you dropped that's sitting on the subframe under the engine or sitting in an engine cowl of a boat that you can't reach. If you're going to work on cars, you're going to need a jack and jack stands. Jack stands, super important. They speak for themselves. Hold up the car after it's been jacked up, and I wouldn't get under a car that's supported only by a jack. Not only is it bad practice, but it's extremely dangerous. In terms of jacks, I use a bigger rolling floor jack just for convenience. This one I think is about $100 Harbor Freight. So far it's been quite dependable. I like it. It's maybe not the best quality, but it's cheap enough that I could replace it if I needed to, and it's served me well so far. If you don't have room for a big jack like that, a smaller one like this will definitely suffice. I've used this when I was at a different apartment and did not have room for a bigger floor jack. I just kept this in the closet. Works very similarly, and I think can be had for maybe 50 bucks. Okay, this is where I'm going to take some heat. This is the only set of wrenches that I have. Now, I would say that it is important to have a good set of combination wrenches, and I don't. These are both small and not as high quality as I might like. but wrenches are important because they can get into spaces and undo bolts that you don't have room to undo with a socket and ratchet. And so far, I've used these for years. They've done what I've needed them to do, but a better set of wrenches is definitely on the wish list. I would also say that an electric drill and drill bits is a must-have tool for drilling holes and screwing screws in quickly. And for less than $30, I'd say it's well worth the money. I also like to keep a set of inexpensive driver bits around that has a lot of the different sized Phillips heads, star bits, or torque bits, I guess they're called, hex bits, square bits, things that you might need. Because while I don't use it terribly often, sometimes you come across fasteners that are a little weird, and usually these kits have the thing for the job. Even if you're not planning on working with metal much, angle grinders are kind of a must. They can not only grind off sharp edges, but the function I use them for often is cutting bolts and cotter pins and cutting little pieces of metal that need to be cut. When it comes to specialty tools like fuel line separators or feeler gauges or pullers, there's lots of different kinds that you might need. My attitude towards these is that, yes, there are situations where you really do need these tools, but I tend to buy them as I need them, and then I'll have them next times. Or a lot of tools you can borrow from auto parts stores like Napa or AutoZone or O'Reilly. They'll charge you the full price of the tool, you borrow it, and then they bring it back. If you want to get an air compressor, maybe to run some air tools or just to have compressed air in the shop, I cannot speak highly enough about these ultra-quiet compressors. Now, this happens to be a Harbor Freight model, but I think they were initially made by California Air Tools, and then a bunch of companies started making clones of them. And if you look up videos on YouTube, it's kind of hard to tell noise levels through a speaker audio, but they really are that much quieter than, say, the old style. You can see under here, this is a old hot dog compressor. That's, it's an oiled compressor, works really well, but it's super loud. And the other thing is it draws a lot of power. So let's say you work in an apartment and you want to just be able to pull your compressor out. You can see this has a handle on it. Pull it out in the parking lot, plug it in. You might need to use an extension cord. Well, these compressors in general draw a lot of amperage when they first start up, and something like this compressor here would draw so much amperage that through most normal extension cords, you wouldn't be able to run it because it would trip the internal breaker in that thing and it wouldn't start up properly. These, well, it's not maybe the best idea to try to run them off of an extension cord all the time, will definitely work, especially if you're in an apartment, and they're very quiet. I can't stress that enough. The one thing is the tank might be a little small for you. For me, I went out and got this little aluminum 7-gallon reservoir here so that I had a bigger air supply for the running air tools. So I never really worry about running out of air, and this thing seems to keep up just fine for my purposes. If you're doing something that's a lot more demanding, obviously you'll need a bigger compressor. When it comes to air tools and operating them, say, in an apartment garage or just outside your apartment, air tools can be pretty noisy. There's not too much you can do about that. Some have fittings on them, like on the bottom here, instead of this grate, there'd be a fitting to attach a little sintered metal silencer. What I found is that you can actually just wrap a rag around where the air comes out. In this case, there's like a little slot that the air comes out. Just wrap a rag around it with some zip ties. Here, there's a fitting that looks almost identical to this, and I just zip tied a little cloth around it, and it makes it run much, much quieter. In fact, with a drill like this, if you stick your hand kind of over it, now you don't want to choke off the airflow, but slightly stick your hand over it, it's quiet enough to run inside. But without that, it makes quite a racket. The one thing I really wouldn't put a rag on to try to silence it is any kind of impact wrench like this, because first of all, the zipping noise coming out of here is going to be drowned out by the hammer hitting the anvil. These things are super loud anyways. The other reason is any sort of impediment to the airflow really does take away from the power of an impact wrench. So as you're slowing down the airflow coming out of here, obviously there's a lot of pressure going in, but if you're adding back pressure to the airflow of any kind, it really is going to slow down the motor in here, and you're going to start to lose a little bit of power. But this is a neat little trick that I don't know if it's worth it for you, because it is kind of clumsy, it's kind of big, but it definitely quiets the tools down a lot. So now I figured I'd share a few thoughts on working on cars and doing mechanical work in general while living at an apartment. Now, before I get started, I should say that every apartment I've ever lived at and every apartment rental agreement I've ever seen includes a clause in it that says something to the effect of working on cars, doing maintenance, and things like that are prohibited on premises. And in addition, any vehicles that are left in the parking area that are either inoperable or have expired registration will be towed at owner's expense, something to that effect. So basically, doing any kind of car maintenance while you're renting from someone, especially with a rental agreement that includes that, which I believe most do, is going to be at your own risk. That said, I've really never had a problem with it, and as long as you're not making a mess or you're not doing anything to disturb your neighbors or do anything that would really catch the eye of the apartment staff, I would think you're probably going to be okay with most things you'd want to do, weekend type maintenance tasks that you might be interested in performing. Now, the biggest thing for me is not making a mess. It's someone else's property, and the biggest thing they're concerned about is both the liability of, say, an oil spill, as well as damage to the property because of something like, oil stains everywhere. I had a neighbor once that actually spilled a bucket of paint, and it's still out there on the street. And to this end, I find that cardboard is great. Put cardboard down everywhere because no matter how careful you are, oil tends to splash out and little droplets get everywhere. As well as funnels. Now, funnels, I have a love-hate relationship with funnels. I don't like them because they're big, they're hard to store, they always drip, and you need to clean them out before you use them for like a different fluid. But they really do help, and otherwise you're sitting there trying to aim a little stream of fluid into a hole, and inevitably you're going to miss. So at the very least, take a water bottle or something and take the top off, cut it, and then you have like a little makeshift funnel. I do that a lot because then you can just throw it away after use. So take precautions, keep your work relatively clean. I'm not the best example of this. But if you do make a mess somewhere, if you do have a spill, especially an oil spill, kitty litter is great. The non-clumping, just a regular cheap kitty litter. Put a bunch of it down, and then let it sit there as long as you can. If it's your own garage or something, just lay it down, let it sit there, even drive over it a few times. Because not only does kitty litter soak up the oil that's spilled and prevent a stain, but it actually acts to soak some of the oil that's in the concrete or in the asphalt out because it's just so absorbent. So it's a great way to prevent stains as well as lighten any stains that may be there. Now, in terms of not drawing attention to the fact that you are working on cars or a boat, say, in your apartment complex parking lot, the biggest thing for me is finishing what I'm doing when I sit down to do it. So if you're going to do an oil change, make sure you get the oil change done. You don't have a car sitting up on jack stands, because nothing says come bother me about rule violations like having a car sitting up on jack stands or having a car in different states of disrepair, because that's what an apartment complex really doesn't like to see. It looks trashy, and it's a clear sign that people are essentially breaking the rules. I had a friend once a long time ago that ran his car into a curb really hard and actually broke both the rims on one side. And the next morning, I helped him get it back to his apartment complex, which wasn't very far away. I just towed it back, and he opted to put it up on jack stands on that side and take the wheels off, and then go get new rims and get new tires put on the rims and put them back on his car. Well, it was only like 2 days. I think the car was on jack stands there for 2 days, and the apartment complex actually had it towed. They didn't care. They just dragged the car off the jack stands and put it in tow lot, and it ended up being a very expensive ordeal for him. So definitely don't leave your cars on jack stands. Don't leave a car, parked somewhere that it might impede either someone or, present itself as an eyesore. The other thing I found is, you can do work when the apartment staff's not there. So, in the evenings, the after-work garage is great because it's not only after my work, but it's after the apartment staff has gone home as well. So, for little things, again, oil changes, tire rotation, stuff like that, you can definitely get that done in the evening. As long as you're not bugging your neighbors, I doubt anyone's going to say anything. Now, on the note of neighbors, I have a very good relationship with the neighbors on both sides of me. They know I do a little bit of work in the garage. I'm friends with them, and I've always said, hey, if I'm making too much noise, if something's going on, feel free, absolutely come tell me. They have my cell phone number. But that's never really been the case. I think most of it can be avoided by just common sense. Don't be making a ton of noise late at night or super early in the morning. And there are some things that'll draw the attention of neighbors and passerbys in your complex, like strong smells, for example, or if you're grinding, if you're like grinding away on metal and there's sparks flying everywhere, or if you have like a torch and you're heating stuff aggressively and you have a garage open, or you're just working in the parking lot and there's people walking by or driving by, they might see that. And it's one of those things that might draw complaints from people who would be uncomfortable seeing things like that. Now, if you're in a position where you don't have access to a garage at all, my best advice would be to get like a little toolkit or a little toolbox. They make some great cloth ones that don't take up much room when there's nothing in them, that you can put all your car tools in. It's like a little car kit, throw in your car, and then you can be able to take all of your car repair things and drive off to either a family member or friend who has a house or some property or some other location that you could do your repairs at. And this way you have everything in sort of a neat little kit. So I know this wasn't a project or repair video, but I thought it might be worth sharing my thoughts, from a non-professional's perspective on some tools and, the realities of working on cars and doing maintenance and mechanical things while living in an apartment. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you next time on the After Work Garage.